Hey folks, today I want to show you a video of a talk I gave recently at the Moxy Summit conference. Now, this is a conference of academics from around the world who all use Moxy in their day-to-day practice. Now, I have featured these on the channel before, and these are what they call a NIRS sensor, so near infrared spectrometry, and they shine a little light into the tissue and they measure the concentration of oxygen in the muscle. Absolutely fascinating. It's completely changed how we coach, how we advise athletes and learn and all sorts. The conference is quite academic, so you can imagine lots of PhD students and doctors all giving talks and presenting their research on slideshows and graphs and that sort of thing. I was invited very much as a practitioner who uses this day to day. Over 150 athletes we've worked with from a range of different backgrounds, over 4,500 different workouts. So a massive breadth of knowledge maybe here, but definitely not the finite, intricate details of some of the people speaking at the conference. So therefore, my talk was about using Moxy in group exercise, the practicalities, like how do we actually do it, and the psychology, the questioning that comes out of it. So here's my talk. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. So Paul's presentation is Moxy in group exercise and coaching, practicalities, and psychology. And I'll just turn things over to you. So take it away, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know who came up with that title, but I guess my experience with Moxy is very much about using it practically in group exercise, and it's a real passion of mine. Just to give you an idea of what we do here. So we are a small group exercise type of gym establishment, I guess, in the English Lake District. I'm speaking to you today from our turbo training studio. I'm sort of on the front road on a weird sort of super wide angle lens, but there's normally like 8 turbo trainers in here. And behind you, you can see the Perf Pro data and the VO2 data that we use. And I'll sort of show you that in a second. Next door, we have like a big strength and conditioning room as well, where we work a lot with the Strong First group actually, and we've been starting to use Moxy with kettlebell swings and that sort of thing. Maybe that's a talk for another year. We've also got a big bike workshop, and upstairs we have sports therapy and all that sort of thing as well. So the whole everything we do really is around supporting groups. We don't really do much in terms of individuals. All our passion is really about working with groups, and what I want to show you today is how we actually do that with all the technology, with 8 people and lots of bikes and lots of heart rate monitors and all that sort of thing. And then what's really interesting, I think what you'll find interesting, is the psychology that comes out of that, the questioning, the learning. It just gets accelerated and exaggerated when you're working with such big groups. So to give you an idea, we have probably about 150 athletes we've been working with over the last 2 years on Moxy, way more without Moxy, and about 4,000 workouts worth of data. And that data is really, really varied as well. We don't tend to do much testing. This is all workouts. And because we do that, we get a real insight into experimenting all the time. And I'm hoping that I can share some of you that today, because it's been really interesting to see how athletes have really changed their thinking once they start getting established with working with Moxy, probably sometimes even 2 or 3 times a week. And we do it here in the Turbo Training Studio, and we go outside as well. So in the summer, we actually coach outside, and we've been using the Moxy app on Garmin as well. So it's been fascinating to take that transition from very structured inside to less structured outside as well. So to give you a quick rundown of our setup, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see. We use Perf Pro, and I really hope that Drew and Velocity are watching, because if this ever goes, God knows what we'll all do. But we have 8 data screens behind us, and on those data screens we have a little graph underneath where we display SMO2. We tend to find that we don't use THB too much. We tend to find that THB blows the minds of most people. We sort of tend to introduce it to athletes as they spend a bit more time with us. But seeing the SMO2 rise and fall can be really, really insightful. We tend to work on the maximums, the minimums, the average, your heart rates, and we try and tie that all together along with your power. When we do the workouts, we tend to do it in course mode rather than erg mode. We find what works when people really start getting established with Moxy is that they start to work out their own intensities, which is incredible. It takes a little time, it takes a little bit of practice, but because people are using Moxie several times a week, that practice happens really quickly, and they tend to find their own intensities rather than relying on a percentage of FTP, and it's been mind-blowing for nearly everyone that uses it with us. So in here we have 8 Tax Neo Turbo trainers. They work fantastically with Perf Pro. We have 2 Wasps. If any of you are using these or aren't using these are just fantastic. They eliminate any sort of interference or data delay problems. We've got 2 of them. We've got one up on the wall, one up on the ceiling. We can have so much data in here, like cadence sensors, heart rate data, core temperature, everything, and it just deals with it fantastically. It never seems to drop, just brilliant. We have 6 Moxie sensors, a massive PC under there that drives it all. And on the screen you can see that we have the VO2 master as well. So on some classes that we run, we might have one individual person who is using a VO2 mask. And then for the rest of it in here is all around bike fitting really. So we have lots of video cameras around, lots of lighting so we can get good light when we're doing like really slow motion sort of bike fits and things as well. So that's our setup. Hope that's kind of useful. What I want to do now is to sort of talk through the learning that takes place and what a typical workout might look like with us. And what we tend to find is when we do a workout, let's say we're doing something like you can see behind us, when we have a set amount of blocks, let's say we're doing a VO2 workout, it's a 4-minute effort, and we kind of encourage riders to experiment as much as possible and how they can approach that 4-minute interval, for instance. So they could go all out, get their power really high, and then just hold on the best they possibly can till the end. They could try and use the Moxie data to try and desaturate on a regular, sustained way throughout that 4 minutes and reaching their minimum muscle saturation at the end of that interval. Or they can use all of that learning that they've established and try and work out the best way to pace a 4-minute effort to get the maximum amount of power based on everything they've learned from that experience. And it takes a little while, but the understanding that comes from that is insane, because it's the amount of people that just try and go absolutely flat out, desaturate really quickly, and then you just see that power disappear. And with the pacing data is incredible. So we really encourage that idea of trying to learn from lots of different inputs. And this is what Moxie gives us. It gives us another visual input into how our metabolism, our body is working, that is blowing people's minds. So we tend to concentrate on the kinesthetic, the learning, the pain in your legs, the beat of your heart, the state of your fatigue. I guess we'd call this the rider perceived effort. And that's something that we really, really do still tend to push. It's like, how are you actually feeling right now? But as you all know, a lot of people really aren't that in touch with their own bodies and need another level of input, which kind of gives us that audio learning. When we have the coach in the room and working with 6 turbo trainers in here, gives us enough space to be able to walk around, actually stand next to your athletes and talk to them and look at their data and actually get that initial feedback from them as well. But they also learn from all their peers, because what we find is that the more established users we have down here who are using us regularly, they will help newcomers. They will help how they might pace an effort or how they might pace an interval, and that learning just gets accelerated. And what we find is that people in the group that are experienced users will often present their learning in a slightly different way to the coach, and which can really accelerate it. It's things that we just really, really encourage, is that communication. And then really from Moxie, what we get is that visual learning. And I don't think there's anything I've ever worked with that really gives us that, that data display that you can see your muscle oxygen desaturating and responding to the pain in your legs and what the coach is telling you, and you get to know what your minimum values are, how far you can go, what your maximum values are, what you can achieve in a certain duration. And that all comes back. Not only that, but you also get the data from all your peers as well, which is mind-blowing, because as much as you're concentrating on your data display, you can't help but just look over and just see what all your friends are doing, and their graphs are going to look really different to yours. Their maximums will be different, their minimums will be different, and then all of those questions start to flow, and this is what gets really exciting for us. So why are my numbers different to their numbers? We ride together all the time, we're about the same sort of level. Why does my graph look so different? Is there something wrong with me? Something that we get asked a lot, or is it good? They're looking at their data and they don't understand whether what they're looking at is good or bad, but that's always one of the key questions people ask. And then we get the how do I improve? And this is the thing that's really got me excited, because the penny drops, and the idea that they're trying to chase a speed or a power output suddenly shifts into how do I achieve the power, because I'm starting to see how my metabolism is working. So how do I lengthen the time it takes me to desaturate over a certain intensity, or how do I recover faster after an effort? And then you have a much more interesting conversation with your client, rather than just chasing numbers or chasing speed. You start to actually look at solutions, and then when you present them with a program strategy, they are much more in tune with what you're talking about, which is fantastic. And this has definitely come true when now that Zwift, etc., are now doing these programs, and the amount of athletes that we have that have come in saying, I've been following a Zwift plan, a Zwift workout, and something's just not working. I've hit my plateau. I'm sure you can all relate to this. And we can start working with them with Moxie, and suddenly they start understanding that it's not all about percentage of FTP, and they can start making much better decisions about their training. And that is the one thing that we really try and encourage, is making more intelligent decisions, not just day by day with your training, as in, am I ready to train today, but also minute by minute actually in the workout. Because definitely in some of the harder workouts, things can change, and you can start finding that line about have you done enough training, which is super cool. Right, I'm going to talk you through what a typical class looks like with us. And first thing we always do is we do a 15 to 20 minute warm up. Now, we always put a structured warm up on the board, and we just encourage people to just do it. Sometimes it's in erg mode, sometimes, most of the time it's in course mode. If they're new, we just ask riders just to follow the normal workout and keep an eye on where their maximum and minimums are. Our much more educated, like long-term users, they constantly plan, do, review their warm-up, and they see this first 15 to 20 minutes as a bit of a challenge. How high can I get my SMO2 by the end of the warm-up? How do I know that I'm going to be fully prepared for the workout ahead? And we've seen all sorts of crazy strategies that people have been trying, and then taking those strategies out to time trial races and road races and seeing if they work or not, and getting that great feedback. And because they're training with Moxie 3-4 times a week, that develops really, really fast, and people have their own like little secret recipe of warm-ups that they bring to a class, and they try and share that information. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others, and some people like to sprint and some people like a slow, steady build. We really encourage that to happen in the first 15 to 20 minutes. After that, we have 3 different types of classes, so riders can choose where their priorities are. We call one class endurance, a threshold class, and then a performance class. And our endurance class then sort of goes on to trying to find where your aerobic steady state is. And we generally try and encourage people to find that aerobic steady state, and then we disrupt it. We try and do either high cadence spin-ups or maybe a few little spins, but then always coming back to that aerobic steady state. So just trying to overload and then just come back in this sort of endurance state. Our threshold is probably much more like your traditional FTP training, which is still, we find still pretty relevant to a lot of people. But using the SMO2 data, we try and encourage our riders to pace their efforts really, really intelligently. And it definitely helps, especially with our time trial audience, about how they actually pace their efforts. So we do things like over-unders and 2 by 20 minutes, that sort of thing, things that you're all familiar with. Our performance class then is all about our high intensity intervals, VO2 max training, and all that sort of thing. And we tend to mix it up a little bit as well. And this is where we really encourage athletes to make intelligent decisions throughout the entire workout, because just because we've set a 30-second interval doesn't necessarily mean that a 30-second interval is right for them. And if 27 seconds or even 23 seconds is working better for them based on how long it takes them to desaturate at an intensity, that's great. Or maybe we adjust the intensity on Perf Pro so that they are getting to their minimum saturation at the end of that 30 seconds. Every workout is different, but we can fine tune this to a degree that we've never been able to do, and on a group basis, which is incredible. Now, in these really hard sessions, what we find is that people often bonk. They are hard sessions, and you can see on the Moxie graphs when that happens. Everyone responds very differently, but what tends to happen is that SMO2 will suddenly just go through the roof, and they will really, really struggle to desaturate again. And that's where we say, okay, and enough's enough training, you've done enough today, and we try and help athletes understand that limit between, have you done enough to trigger your adaptation in your training today, and if you do any more training, are you going to risk impeding your recovery? And we can really help athletes make those decisions actually in the workout as well, which I think is pretty cool. Now, the other thing we like to do, which might be the subject of another talk as well, we can experiment loads and loads and loads, and the ideas that have been coming out in the studio is incredible. So sometimes we get off and walk, especially for people that are showing differences in their total hemoglobin. During the rest period, they literally just get off and take a walk outside, have a little stretch, and it changes how they perform on the bike massively, as opposed to just sat in a riding position. Some riders get off and sit down, even put their legs up against the wall and elevate their legs. It works for some people, and it actually makes a huge amount of difference as well. Some people take energy gels, and they're using the SMO2 data to time when they actually take some nutrition, definitely in some of our longer classes as well. And some of our triathletes even go for a little run as well, just to see what difference that has and how it works with their brick sessions. So yeah, it's a mind-boggling amount of experimentation that goes on when you start working with groups, because the ideas just flow. One thing we have been doing fairly recently, you might be interested in, is we've actually been experimenting with Moxie with time trial bike fits as well. And really, sometimes when we see those occlusions is, are we taking a bike fit to an extreme point where we're actually inhibiting performance? Now, this is something that I'm only just starting to get into, maybe the subject for another talk some other time, but it's an interesting way of experimenting at the moment. If anyone wants to see an example of this, we've actually done a YouTube video where we actually set 100 30-second intervals, and we just challenged our riders to try and use the Moxie data and try and pace those 100 intervals as best you can. And then we went through and analysed the entire workout and how everybody approached that workout in a completely different way and responded in a different way. It was pretty good. Now, one of the things we do here actually in the gym is we try and support our athletes with their understanding a bit better. So we tend to do the same workout each month, really, so that lots of our athletes come in and experience the same workout. And then we gather all the data from a particular workout, and I have a little studio where I go through the data and I try and help athletes unpick the differences, why someone responded one way and another person responded another way, and we sort of complete that feedback loop. We keep that pretty private. We have a little booking app that we call Team Up, and on there we have like an on-demand class so that people can log in and opt in and opt out of that as they want. But the feedback from that has been fantastic as to the feedback loop gets completed, because I promise you, at the end of a class, when you have 8 people whose minds have just been blown, the questions that come suddenly bombarded at you, you sometimes just need a little bit of time to think, analyse the data, and then come back at it and try and offer that research or that analysis in a much more structured way. So I'm just about running out of time here. I've got about a minute left. To sum up, I would say that Moxie has given us the ability on an individual basis and really empowering our athletes to ask questions, experiment, be curious, and try new things, discover our own bodies in ways that you've never really thought about before, and think and train much more intelligently. Working in groups, I think, really accelerates that. I personally find it really interesting. I think people that come down here, their learning is just, it's super fast. It's really empowering. I think it's highly educational. And if I'm honest, I think it is a lot of fun. I'd encourage anyone to give it a go with training with Moxie in a group. Yeah, that's all from me. I am just about on my time. I hope that's okay. And I really look forward to any of your questions.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate the presentation and way to do it without a PowerPoint. That was really awesome. So I love that. Really appreciate that. Could you comment a little bit on with the Perf Pro? Are you using some of the automated features in Perf Pro to share the data with the athletes? So, like, do they get the data emailed to them, or do you use any of that functionality?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point, actually, and I'm glad you're here because we upload to Strava. We also upload to Xcert. A lot of our athletes, we encourage them to use Xcert. It's one of those things where it's like touch coaching, which really supports how we work, and it would be great if that Moxie data would ever one day in the future work with Xcert. That would be dreams. So that's where they go.
Okay. So the way to make that happen is for everyone that's listening to email Xcert and ask them to do it, because I've talked with them and they say, yeah, when there's enough people that want it, they'll do it. So
excellent.
So if everyone that's listening, email Xcert.
Do it.
I don't know if we're going to get Strava, but it can't hurt to start emailing these people and give them the feedback, and we'll see if we can get them in.
Xcert would be great. Cool.
We got a couple questions here. Let's see. Thanks for the talk. Do you repeat or do you prescribe workout targets with SMO2? I'm not sure I understand that exactly. So go. Yeah. Do you prescribe workout targets with SMO2?
Yes, I think I understand that. Yes, I think what you're alluding to is sometimes in the performance workouts, we might ask them to fully desaturate to their minimum. Other times we might ask people to try and do close to their minimum or 10% above their minimum, or give them a target where they know that they can't desaturate fully because they've got a smaller rest recovery, but they'll try and desaturate fully by the end of a set of intervals. So this is where I get to know those athletes an awful lot more, and I try and give them individual as I understand them better. So for instance, if we're doing something like 5 30-second intervals, the goal might be to achieve minimum saturation at the end of the 5th rather than the end of the 1st, if that's what you mean. So we try and work a bit like that when we give them goals.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the bike fitting, do you see big differences with changes in the bike fitting, big differences in the SMO2?
And not SMO2, total hemoglobin. Yeah, actually, and I think the longer they stay in the time trial position, we definitely see changes. So athletes that come in here and train on a road bike in a much more upright position will see their SMO2 very different when they come onto their time trial bike. And then that started to see there's bigger difference in where those occlusions are happening. Hip mobility, just nearly all the time we have that problem. It's like we get next door into the strength and conditioning room and it's hip mobility. But it really highlights, I think, to time trialists who are trying to get an aggressive position, how important that is, because they've got another input, if you like, another data point that says, come on, if you want to ride this aero position, you need to work on this because you're cutting off circulation, you're building up occlusions, and the Moxie data kind of backs that up a little bit, and then helps us with that compromise in that fit as well. So I've only worked on this about 6 athletes so far, so my thinking is still a bit cloudy, but so far it's definitely asking that question is, do we go super aggressive and super aero, or do we relax the fit a little bit and enable blood flow and oxygen to work a bit better? So that's Early days yet, but I'm going to keep going with that. I think it's a fascinating area of of thinking.
Have you had any athletes use this during a time trial competition?
Yeah. So I am really reluctant to let the Moxies out of my sight, but I have done on a couple. But I have done on a couple of occasions, and yeah, they've been more useful than a power meter in terms of pacing a time trial. Once people really understand what it is they're looking at, the feedback is that the Moxie is way more useful than a power meter, which is great. When we do our outside classes, we have a big area of flat down by the sea, which is lovely, and we can do this on a group section as well. And again, that feedback is that pacing this, it's about an 8 kilometre sort of flat section where people tend to try and get into a very aero position and hammer it out. And the feedback from that is that they spend more time looking at the Moxie data than they would do looking at their power data once they understand what it is that they're looking at. So yeah, I think definitely.
Okay, excellent. One comment here, it says, thanks, Paul, this is great. Love the spirit of self-experimentation, especially using oxygenation to self-solve the warm-up problem.
It's the ideas that come out of these guys are crazy. I don't know where they get the ideas from, but they'll come in here having spent the previous week at the cycling club talking through ideas, and they go, I've got this great idea, I really want to try it. The enthusiasm is insane. So.
Awesome. Okay, well that's, I think, the end of our questions here. So again, really appreciate the presentation. Great work. I love everything you're doing here. It's super exciting. I really appreciate that.
Nice one. Thank you.